We are going to get started. So welcome, I'm Laura Wagner. I'm the Special Events Coordinator here with the St. Cloud Area Chamber of Commerce. And today's presentation is part of our virtual series called Greater Minnesota Economy Amid COVID-19. Thank you all for registering and coming to join us this morning. Just a few housekeeping tips before we get too far in. As has become accustomed with these virtual meetings, please mute yourself, and any questions that you have, please put those questions in the chat, and I will be monitoring that, and we'll get to those questions at the end. Any questions in general, just reach out, put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. So I do want to take a minute and just thank the Greater St. Cloud Development Corporation and the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis for collaborating on this presentation. Thank you to both of those organizations. We wouldn't be able to put this on today without them. And finally, I will hand it over to our speaker, our guest speaker today, Mr. Ron Wirtz. He's the Regional Outreach Director for the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. Welcome, Ron, and thanks for being here, and on to you.
Good morning, Laura. Good morning, everyone that has attended today. I appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we'll be able to learn some things. I'm going to do some sharing of some survey work and some other things that I've done. I am also going to get a little information from you, and I'll explain why a little bit later. But basically what the Fed wants to do is do as much outreach as we can in this particular environment, because we're really in need of information. And I guess before I get started, I'd like to say thanks to St. Cloud Area Chamber of Commerce and the Greater St. Cloud Development Corp also for hosting this event. I used to do a lot of in-person speaking, and this has required us to do things like everybody else in a different way. And I think in a lot of ways, this is going to help me do better outreach, because we finally had to make the leap to more webinar focused, more online kinds of presentation, which really does make it easier to share information that we're gathering, to also touch base with more businesses to learn how your finances and how your businesses have been affected in this pandemic. We've really seen a need for better real-time information. And because of that, one of the things that we've done is we've started conducting more surveys. Since mid-March, I've conducted 7 surveys of kind of different scope. Two of which the St. Cloud Area Chamber is partnered on. I'm guessing that maybe some of you that are attending today's webinar have actually been respondents to one or more of those surveys, and I just want to say thank you. We've really found those surveys to be a very good measure of how businesses are performing. I think equally important as the responses you give to specific questions is you've given us an absolute load of open comments. So many that it's been hard actually to get through all of them, but we read almost all of them. And I can't tell you what kind of granular additional information it gives us for really trying to understand at a very micro level how much this pandemic has been affecting businesses. So for those that have participated in past surveys, I want to say thanks. And for those that maybe haven't, we are going to be running surveys in the future, and your participation is always very, very welcome. So before I get into my more formal remarks, first I have to give you what I call my bozo slide. So basically what I'm going to present to you, these are my views and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System. So that means if I say something foolish or dumb or inaccurate, you have to blame the clown and not the circus, okay? What I want to do is run you through, so the webinar format can be a little dry in terms of its engagement. So I can't, as I'm presenting, I can't see you all, so I have to pretend you're paying attention. I hope you are. But what I'll do in order to hopefully facilitate that, excuse me as I have a fat finger there, what I want to do is I'm going to show you a lot of data. I'm going to show you a lot of pictures, and I'm going to keep those pictures moving. And so I'm going to make a few points on each one. But I'm going to try to keep this moving at a fairly quick pace. One of the things I'll be able to do in following up afterwards, that if you happen to be interested in any particular screen that I've showed you, is I'm happy to share the PowerPoint so you might have a chance to take a look at some of the data that I show you in more detail. Laura, I don't know if there are any questions that pop up in the chat box. I won't be able to see that, but if you want to just give me some kind of verbal cue that there's a question, I'm happy to take questions as we go. Otherwise, I'll just get started.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a quick take on the COVID job shock. We're all familiar with what's happened, but it is interesting to take a picture and take a look at a couple of quick snapshots that I also want to help explain some context of. Then the majority of this is I'm going to talk about one of the most recent surveys that I've done, and one that the St. Cloud Area Chamber of Commerce was involved in. And generally speaking, I think we're all familiar that right now current economic conditions are very poor. Some of the data that we have, though, shows that it's less bad in some sectors and places. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what lies ahead, and that mostly refers to what the Minneapolis Fed is trying to do to help understand what is happening to businesses. So first, I want to talk a little bit about unemployment. Again, I think we're all familiar that unemployment is rising significantly. What I wanted to show you here is that, as I can get a quick highlighter here. So if you take a look at just this last month of data, in
Ron,
1 month.
Ron,
Yes,
sorry,
Laura.
hold on. We're not seeing anything on our screens yet.
Oh, really? Thank you.
I'm going to try to screen share again.
Yep. I have to get out of this. Thank you for noting that. Let's try again. Are you seeing anything there?
No.
Hang on. Okay.
Do you have it open and running on your desktop?
I do. Yep.
Okay.
Do we want to try? Hang on.
We're getting something. So I can see your Windows screen now.
Can you see that now?
It's still your Windows.
Okay, because I have my PowerPoint up here. Let's try again. Now I am unable to.
I'm going to stop the participant sharing, and why don't you try it on your desktop again? Go to screen share and just make sure, I don't know if you have multiple things open, but just make sure you're choosing the correct screen share.
Right. Okay, let me close out of some things because this was okay, that I actually have to leave open or you won't have audio. My apologies to everyone.
Or if it's easiest and you just want to email it to me quick.
No, let's try this again.
Okay.
How about that?
Yes, there we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for interrupting. I apologize for the delay. Not sure what exactly was the trouble there. Admittedly, doing these on different platforms seems like they all have a few quirks of their own. Okay, and now do you see a split screen again, like we had talked about before we actually got on here?
Yep.
Okay. Now I think we're in business, yes?
Perfect.
Outstanding. Thank you again for your patience. Okay, so I've already covered that and that. Okay, so here we're gonna start talking about the actual unemployment. Okay, so now, and can you see that little highlighter?
Yes.
Great. So here you have in just the last month, this is the April number only. What we've seen in the last month is that all of the unemployment rates at every state level have reached or exceeded Great Recession levels. I just want to make one quick point. Minnesota has released the number and it's only 8%. I say only 8% because, as you can see, every other state that I'm using in some comparisons are significantly higher. In Wisconsin, you have it at 14%, US rate about 15%. What we actually think is this is probably an undercount. There's a lot of methodological reasons why we think this is probably an undercount. We're expecting either a very large revision in April or for the May number to go up significantly. The reason we think that is that if you look at things like initial unemployment claims and continuing claims, Minnesota's been reacting from a job loss standpoint very much like the nation, very much like Wisconsin, but it has not been reflected in the unemployment rate. So here you have initial unemployment claims, and as I think people are probably familiar with, you saw an immense spike, a spike that we've literally never seen in the history of this program in mid-May and through the following 5 weeks. While they are descending in scale, they are still significantly higher than what they were pre-virus, okay? Now, what this also suggests, though, is that you have to take these numbers, these blue numbers, with a grain of salt, because what we're actually looking more at are these continuing claims. Continuing claims are those that not only filed but got on and are receiving benefits going forward. Okay, so what we've seen is that there is this ebbing of continuing claims. So we think there is some slowing of the unemployed. But what you also see, there's about 600,000 initial claims in this period alone, but our continuing claims are still about 425,000. The reason that is because not all initial claims actually go and get benefits. Some get hired back before they actually start receiving claims. Some claims are denied. So the continuing claims is a figure that we're probably paying more attention to. We're certainly paying attention to these initial claims, but in terms of tracking where unemployment is heading, this is probably a more accurate measure. So now I want to talk about the May 2020 survey, and this is a survey that we did across the 9th District. And for those that may not be familiar, the 9th Federal Reserve District runs all the way from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and northwestern Wisconsin all the way over to Montana. So we put out a survey through a number of partners, including the St. Cloud Area Chamber of Commerce, to poll businesses of a wide variety on what they were seeing in their own personal business. We got 1,100 respondents across the 9th District, including, I believe, about 700 in Minnesota alone, roughly equal in greater Minnesota and in the Twin Cities. And you'll see my results split out so you can see the differences between those. The findings and the number of respondents give us a number of ways to splice the data to see who's impacted and what degree. But what I'm going to show you have mostly to do are going to be along the lines of firm demographics. I'm going to present you with data that are mostly at the state level. But what I want to stress up front is that state designations are a little bit arbitrary, and it really depends on who the underlying sample is below that has more of an influence on how firms are performing. I'll explain that a little bit more as we go. So the first thing that we asked was how revenue has been impacted among businesses. And what you see here, again, generally speaking, a lot of the results, you'll see greater Minnesota and Twin Cities region largely in the middle for a lot of results. And what we asked, what you want to pay attention to are the darker the bar, the worse the experience. So this darkest bar, those businesses saw revenue drop in April 2020 compared to 2019 by 75% or more. 30% as a group actually saw zero revenues during April in terms of our respondent base. So they've been devastated everywhere, as you can see by this, geographic representation. It's not been necessarily equal across all states, as you can see from this. We also had the opportunity to take a look at the impact by sector. And what you see is that those businesses that are consumer facing and that are crowd based are seeing the strongest impact. So those in entertainment, food, lodging, retail, healthcare was one that surprised us early on, but with the shutdown of elective surgeries and all of those ancillary staff, healthcare has really taken on quite an impact from this as well. So what you see is that not every business has, or every sector has been impacted to the same degree. You have in manufacturing, professional, technical, and especially banking has seen significantly smaller impact in terms of their own revenues. The other way to think about how businesses have been affected and who's been affected is to think about firm size. And what we've seen is that those larger businesses have generally seen smaller impact than those that are small or a single proprietor. 70% of sole proprietors again, in this particular survey have seen, 70% of them have seen their revenues drop by 50% or more. Now, again, if I can just go back, a larger share of sole proprietorships also happen to be in these spaces here. Equally, more of these tended to respond in places that were affected more. So if I can just kind of explain that again, those places that saw less impact tended to have tended to have more respondents that were in sectors that were less affected in general: banking, manufacturing, etc. Now, it wasn't a huge difference, but it was enough of a difference that I think that explains at least some of the variation among states. I do think that some of the state shelter-in-place regulations have an influence without doubt, but I don't think it has the same effect as it is showing on screen. I think there are more reasons why different states in this survey showed a little bit different results. Does that make sense? I hope so. If anyone has more questions about that, or I need to explain it again, just put a question in the chat box. I'd be happy to explain it again. So in terms of other impacts, we know that once businesses see lack of revenue, of course they can't keep paying workers. So we are seeing a lot of workers get laid off. And what we're seeing, again, same as revenues, as you would expect, we're seeing stronger impacts in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and then kind of cascading down relatively the same relationship that we saw relative to revenues. Even among those that have that still have a job, many are seeing wage cuts as well. So we're seeing actually here where there's a little bit of flip-flop in some of the geographic dispersion, is that in greater Minnesota, we actually saw a higher propensity for wage cuts. And the other thing to note is that when wages are being cut, roughly a little bit more than a third of greater Minnesota firms that responded said they've also cut wages. And when they do, most of them are cutting them by more than 10%. Which is a very significant number. So one of the other things that I think is getting a lot of attention that we wanted to ask about and get some insights in is about reopening and how quickly we might return to some semblance of business as usual. I think this, to me, offers some insights at a couple of different levels. First, there is definitely a share of businesses that are interested in trying to scale up quickly again if given the opportunity. There are others that will do it a little bit more slowly. And then there still are a fair share of businesses that are uncertain or really don't expect to make any changes. And then there are some that are maybe were considered essential, really haven't changed their operations. So there's really a wide variety of responses that we got to this question about how businesses are going to react if state policy is not an encumbrance to their operations. But to me, it suggests that because there's a lot of opinion and a lot of approaches to this, a quick return to normal is probably not very likely, regardless of what state policy looks like wherever we happen to be. We also are very interested about levels of solvency. How long can firms stay in business under these really crushing kind of economic circumstances? And what we found is kind of a good news, bad news. What we're interested in is less than 3 months is kind of what we're putting in as kind of a line in the sand, especially in terms of thinking about policy responses. And what we're seeing is that overall, about 1 in 4 firms over the entire 1,100 respondents say they cannot survive more than 3 months. Again, if you happen to be a sole proprietor, if you happen to be in an entertainment or retail, you are more likely to respond that you can't survive longer than 3 months. If you were a larger business, if you were a manufacturer, you were more likely to say you could remain solvent longer. If there's any good news to this particular chart, it's that we asked the same question a month earlier in the same survey, and what we found is that solvency has actually improved a little bit. The first survey we found it was 32, 33%. Now it's about 1 in 4. So we saw a small improvement. We think a fair amount of that is likely because there's been the payroll protection program. Uh, what we found is that there was very high demand for it, a lot of uptake, and for if you across all of these particular geographic areas, the percentage of firms that applied for aid, roughly about 3/4 of all businesses have received funding. So in many ways, I think there were certainly some rollout hiccups. No program of this scale and and the the emergency nature of it. I think there were going to be some hiccups, but in general, it did manage to find a lot of businesses with need and was able to get them capital, which I think is a good thing. Just two things real quick on the PPP program. So in the first round, there was really big uptake, and the program tended to give out bigger money. Okay, Minnesota competed very well in terms of actual money received. Okay, in the first round, and also it generally gave out loans that averaged about 200,000. In round two, what we found is that there's still very strong demand. There's a lot more focus on smaller business, and we gave out many smaller loans. So there were many more loans that made it to many more small business in that second round. I think that was the goal, and I think they achieved that. Here you can see the average size loan in the second round, about 1/3 of what was handed out in the first round. But overall, there were about the same number, maybe a little bit more of actual loans made to those small businesses. So where do we go to from here? We've learned a lot from our survey work, but one of the problems that the pandemic has really showed the Federal Reserve System is that we have depended on data systems that have not been particularly timely, and we have a significant need for better real-time measures of economic activity. So we have been looking at different kinds of data, non-governmental data, to give us a much more robust, near-term or real-time look at what's happening in the economy. I'm going to show you a couple of charts. What we're doing is we're building a COVID-19 dashboard. It's online right now. If you go to minneapolisfed.org, I should have put that address right here. I'm sorry I didn't, but if you Google Minneapolis Fed COVID dashboard, you'll get it. What we're trying to do is we are searching for and making agreements with lots of different kinds of both public and private entities to get more transactional data. In the past, we've never really needed to know what happened yesterday or maybe even last week. Now we are in need of information that is as timely as possible. And so we're looking at different sources to do that. Here's one that's from Open Table. Basically, this is a restaurant reservation system. And what we've seen is that it's a really good indicator of what happened at restaurants. It basically went down to 0 in Minnesota because of the shelter-in-place regulations. We're now just starting to see some uptick in both the national levels and Minnesota levels. These are the kinds of measures that we're trying to find more of. Some of these are also problematic, or at least they don't give us the full picture. For example, a lot of these use social media and other kinds of apps, and some of them still don't penetrate rural areas very much, which we're very cognizant of. But for right now, we're trying to find as much information that is there that can help us help give us a better idea of activity, and then trying to fill in more of the gaps as we go along. Some other ones that you might be interested that are on our website, we're following Minnesota traffic volume. And so you have, in this case, you have both a metro and a statewide, which is useful, and you've seen a fairly similar trend there, but well below what is normal. The interesting part is though we've seen truck traffic after some initial decline, we're actually seeing heavy truck traffic maintain a relatively stable trend right now, which we think bodes well, at least right now. We're also looking at TSA checkpoint numbers. So we used to track airport travel, and we used to get passenger data from the airports, which would get at them from the airlines. That data typically lagged by 1 or 2 months, which isn't good enough in our current environment. So what we did is we traveled upstream to TSA, and we're now getting data from TSA on TSA screenings, which is a pretty good proxy for overall travel. And what we're finding, again, as you would expect, because I think people are familiar with that, there's just very little air travel right now, that things have really gone down roughly about 95%. But what we have now is a measure that as consumer confidence goes up and as business travel goes up, we'll have a better feel in a more real-time sense of what's happening to it. So I've given you a very quick glance at what the Minneapolis Fed has uncovered through its survey work and through some of its other work. Whenever I get in front of a business group, I always want to take the opportunity to get your opinions, your insights on what the bank can learn from your own experience. So what I have now is an interactive survey that I would like the group to take that will not only provide more information for the Minneapolis Fed. The nice part of it is it's a real-time share survey, so you will learn as much as I will about the few questions that I'd like to learn from members about. So in order to take this survey, I need you, first one, I need you to get your phone. I assume most of you have it nearby. So when you have your phone, I need you to send a text to this number here. So this is the person that is called 22333. And I need you to text the word Minneapolis. If it happens to capitalize in your text box, that's fine. So text that word. So after you hit send, watch for a message, and you should get a pop-up box that says you've joined a regional outreach survey. Laura, if you might, I'm hoping that you're doing this with us. If you could give me some indication from somebody that the technology is working.
I got mine. Anybody else? Can you give a thumbs up if, okay.
Okay, so it's working. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. And Laura, here might actually be a good opportunity to maybe find a question or two, because as we take the survey, I want to allow some time for response. And there might be an opportunity for me to start answering questions at this point, given that, yeah, we're already almost at getting close to a half hour. And I want to be respectful of people's time, but also try to get to as many questions as I can. I am perfectly happy to stay as long as people have questions. I'll stay here as long as people want to stay on and ask questions of me, because I think there's still a lot to learn, both from you in this survey, as well as from the kinds of questions that you'd like to know more about. So if there are any questions, maybe when we get to the first question, you can throw that my way. Otherwise, I'll do my best color commentating impression, and I can also talk about the survey results as they come in. So stay in the text mode. When I hit the next slide, hopefully the survey will pop up. All you're going to do is you're going to hit the letter of your response and hit send, and you'll see responses start coming in. The first question might take a little bit to load, and I have had on different platforms, the display is a little different. Okay, so I'm going to have to get out of this display, and I have to go to that split screen screen, Laura. Okay. All right, so here, the first question should come up here fairly quickly. Okay, so now here, all you have to do, read the question and then type whatever letter responds to your answer. And then hit send, and we'll start seeing survey results pop up in real time. At least that's my expectation. That's how it happens otherwise. Okay, good, it is working. So it looks like, I think what the bank I think the bank's general position on what faster economic activity means is really, frankly, along the lines of what the survey respondents are saying. I don't think there's any question that state and local business restrictions, or let's say policies, are going to have some influence. But we're really talking about, I think, in many ways, consumer confidence. That's obviously affected by lots of things, including state policies, but it also, I think, is related to how um, how consumers are viewing the actual health risk itself. So it is going to be a kind of all of the above process, probably. Question number 2. So I asked you about solvency, or I showed you a slide about it. Now I'm interested in your 6-month solvency. And I wouldn't normally ask a question that's quite this dire, but that's kind of the circumstances that we're in, that we're worried less about how profitable firms are, which would be our normal interest. Now we're simply interested in knowing where business solvency is, because it's such a dramatic and important question in terms of policy making, in terms of monetary policy making. So I'm very happy to see that there's no very negative ones uh, with us today. I would understand if there would be. You know, a fairly large percentage have a not very positive opinion. I think that is reflected in what we generally hear from a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of businesses in general. So this is very useful information. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Moving on to question 3. And I believe this is the last one. So we're interested in kind of where you are now in terms of your outlook. I'm interested to know whether it's changed much. A lot has changed, say, at the state policy level. Some things have changed from an economic standpoint. I'm curious whether or not your outlook has changed much over the last 4 to 6 weeks. So it really feels like it's very balanced, some of both, which which I think makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that um, I have tremendous respect for business owners. Um, to be able to run a business normally is very tough. To be able to run it in the current environment has to be 10 times harder. So the volatility of things, it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of different opinions about outlook and whether things are changing over, you know, over short periods of time. So my takeaways here, you know, COVID obviously has had a huge impact, and everywhere. Not everywhere the same, but even those places that have been that have been affected less, under normal circumstances would be catastrophic. It's just unfortunate that there are some places that are seeing even more negative impacts. Um, to the Minneapolis Fed, to the Federal Reserve System, it does kind of appear that the quick recovery appears unlikely, short of a vaccine breakthrough and ramp up. And a more gradual recovery is probably more likely, driven by consumer confidence, which I think, as everyone here knows, it's going to be driven by a lot of things, not only reopening policies, but just the general track of the virus itself and infection rates. And it's something that we're going to be watching closely, not only in terms of the COVID numbers. It's something that we're trying to watch more closely, trying to get better measures of in terms of how consumers are reacting. And as we get those better measures, we want to be able to try to share them increasingly with folks in these kinds of environments, share them on our website, so the public has as good information as the Federal Reserve does. That is the close of my formal comments. I would love to get some questions from those that might have them, based maybe on something that I've presented, or maybe something that I haven't presented. Maybe after I can get the first question, I would love, because I'm new to this webinar, I'd be fascinated to get some feedback from you. So if you wouldn't mind taking one last survey question here that hopefully pops up. And Laura, it looks like I'm going to have to do the other screen again. Laura, if you happen to have any questions, I would be happy to take them now.
Sure. We do have the question about if we'd be able to share the copy of the slides used from the presentation today. If you're willing to share those, we certainly would be able to facilitate getting those out to everyone present.
Yes, absolutely. I am happy to share the data. I'm glad that people are interested in it. I absolutely will provide the slide deck. What I will also do is I will make a quick summary of the survey questions themselves for people that might not be or that might be interested. Those unfortunately don't embed in the PowerPoint, so I'll make a quick document for the survey results as well, and I'll be happy to share that as well. And I should say too, there's an awful lot more information on our website, minneapolisfed.org. I know that everybody is inundated and fatigued with COVID information. That is largely what we are putting out, in part because that is by far and away the most important thing that's going to be going on for the foreseeable future. So to the extent that you have appetite for COVID-19 research, activity, research not only from a more theoretical and more economic research base, but also from a real-time economy standpoint, our website, minneapolisfed.org, it would be a great resource for anyone looking for more information, particularly on the Minnesota economy and neighboring states.
Okay. We do have a question, a couple of questions in the chat. Does the federal, do you anticipate additional government programs to assist small businesses?
I'm not a great resource there. I don't think my opinion, I only say that, I don't think my opinion is going to be any more informed probably than most everyone attending today who's paying attention to these matters. I think it's very clear that that the federal government is interested in additional assistance. My bank president, Neil Kashkari, is a big proponent of getting resource to business, and basically worrying about the heart attack right now and worrying less about the consequences in an immediate sense, knowing that there are going to be consequences for more borrowing and things like that. But the alternative, his opinion, the alternative is worse if legions of business owners go out of business. So his opinion, for those that may not be familiar, Neil Kashkari, our bank president, was the head of TARP, the bailout program, the bank bailout program during the Great Recession. And he said the single biggest lesson he took away from that was that help didn't come quick enough. And it didn't come in the scale that was necessary to try to stop some of the hemorrhaging. And his opinion is that's exactly what we should be, that's the lesson we should be taking forward, so that if we can help businesses stay afloat, we have to consider every measure possible.
Okay. Do you have breakdowns for the number of respondents per region? Was the question asked.
I do. I don't have that at my fingertips. Basically, what I can tell you is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I believe, maybe 100, 150. Wisconsin had actually a fairly small number, I believe 60 or 70. The Twin Cities, I believe, had about 300. Greater Minnesota, about 400. North Dakota, about 200. South Dakota, maybe 100, and probably not more than 60 or 70 in Montana. Again, those are very rough numbers. But generally speaking, we get a really good response in Minnesota. And for those that may be listening that were actually some of the survey takers, I can't say enough. Thank you for taking the time. I know there are a ton of surveys out there that are asking for input on how you've been affected and what's your opinion on things. To the extent that you have the patience and the stamina to continue answering those surveys from the Minneapolis Fed, they are incredibly valuable to us.
Okay. The next question, Ron, is in reference to a conference from May 26th that was moderated by Tom Brokaw. It's posted on the federal site there. Could you briefly summarize that content?
This might sound odd. Unfortunately, I can't, because I I was doing a different webinar at the same time, and so I wasn't able to take part in that or listen in. My impressions, I believe we had 4,000 registrations to that, so it was very, very widely attended. I do expect us to come out with some content on our website expressly about that conference. When it is, I am happy to, first you should look on our website for that, and I'm also happy to push that out maybe to the chamber to distribute it out to the members that are involved here. I mean, I think generally you're hearing you heard many of the same themes here that were probably discussed there. This is going to be a long recovery, we think. There are lots of businesses that are having problems. I think they talked also a little bit more about the epidemiology of the virus and how to think about it and things of those natures. So it was much more wide ranging than this particular conversation, in part because it was 2 hours long, or maybe even 3 hours long, I believe.
Okay, great. And it sounds like somebody did attend it. So
yes, it sounds like, and thank you for attending that as well.
yeah.
I think this is also, frankly, a good example that the Minneapolis Fed really does want to be visible during this, in terms of gathering information and sharing information as widely as we possibly can. So if there are those that are watching today that think this was useful, think there might be other crowds that would be interested in this, as I note here on the slide, I am happy to get referrals so I can not only provide some information from the Minneapolis Fed, but again, take the pulse of that crowd that has given me their time.
Great. And the last question that I have in the chat right now, so if you have any other thoughts, questions, be sure to get them in now. But right now, the last one is, do you see any silver linings into the future? Are there opportunities that might exist in the future that result from this crisis?
Well, I think, like the old saying, there's, we shouldn't waste a crisis. It said more eloquently than I did. I don't think there's any question that that businesses will learn from the crisis. The Federal Reserve will clearly learn an immense amount in terms of how to think about not only monetary policy, how do you react to help businesses in a time of crisis? We're rethinking how we even track the economy itself. So I don't think there's any question that the pandemic is gonna force systemic rethinking on virtually everything. And I think the first movers that are able to anticipate what those changes mean, they'll be the successful ones. Businesses, those that are able to maybe again skate where the puck is heading, they'll be the ones that have some advantage. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what those are. And I think more than anything, we hope that the crisis itself isn't so structurally damaging that that we see so much infrastructure damage to the business community that everything has to be rebuilt. But I don't think there's any question that there'll be opportunity coming out of this. We just hope those opportunities show up very quickly.
Great. All right. Well, that I believe time-wise too kind of wraps us up. Ron, if you have anything else you want to share before we go.
I just want to say thanks. Everyone's busy in this period, especially business people. Again, I have tremendous amount of respect for business owners. I did before this. Now in this environment, I want to just say good luck in this environment. I think everyone is trying to find a way to the other side, and I just want to say that I hope you get the assistance you need. To the extent that the Minneapolis Fed can help along those lines, we're going to do our best. And I just want to wish everyone good luck and thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ron. Thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and the Greater St. Cloud Development Corporation for collaborating on this. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.